What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Floyd Street's Finest. I'm your host, your friend, Jeff Brewer. So excited to be back here with you. And as always, we make sure to mention we are part of the Field of 68 Media Network. Go find us on YouTube, Twitter, across all those different social media platforms. And make sure you check out the wide array of college hoops podcasts. Of course, they get into the NBA as well. In the international game, there's a whole lot of podcast material that you can listen to, and highly recommend it across the country and the sport. We have a great episode for you today. Brooks Holton, the Louisville men's basketball beat writer for the Courier-Journal, is going to join us for a conversation. We'll get to know Brooks a little bit and his background. And we'll also obviously talk about this offseason, how things are going so far. I would say pretty good. So we'll talk to him about that. Before we do that, though, I do want to let you know that today's episode is partnered with Athletic Greens. Now, Athletic Greens has a huge impact on energy levels. People who are big coffee drinkers, maybe they're looking for some afternoon energy. They've got a little bit of a boost for you from Athletic Greens. Helps tremendously, even on days when you don't want to go to the gym. Their tagline is AG1 is comprehensive health and the power of habit in one, and that couldn't be more true. It's impossible to eat and drink in a healthy manner for a lot of people. And AG1 is exactly the supplement that you need to improve gut health and cover nutritional bases for the day. Just mix a scoop of it in with some water or add it to a smoothie, and you'll be ready to go. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/field-of-68. That's athleticgreens.com/field-of-68. Go ahead and check it out. Now, very excited to welcome onto the show our friend Brooks Holton for a fun conversation. Stay tuned. All right, we are joined by Brooks Holton, the young gun. Brooks, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Well, as I said in the intro, Brooks is the new Louisville men's basketball beat writer for the Courier-Journal, which, Brooks, I learned, and I'm dating myself here, but the first couple of times out on the road back in 2013, I learned how powerful that phrase is around the college basketball world. So you are going to be showing up at all these places, and already have been, with a little swag to you, because there will be people out there who are, it's a Courier-Journal Louisville basketball, right? That's a big deal. How's it going so far? What's been your experience so far covering Louisville men's basketball?
I mean, it's been great getting thrown into it, in February. Obviously, I hate to, get somewhere because we have somebody great leaving, and that was, Brett Dawson. He was definitely like a huge mentor for me. I love reading his stories. Like, I felt like I was getting better as a writer, just checking out how he did things after games. So it sucks that Brett left. We miss him a lot, but, I was super excited to get onto the beat. I grew up here, and I know how much this team, means to people in the city. So, when I got asked to cover the team, it was definitely a huge honor. I started last May at the CJ in a recruiting role. So I was already kind of covering the team. I went to media day, was doing some interviews there and, setting up some stories. But, I would also get pulled in a ton of different directions last fall covering high school football, filling in for some different beat writers when they were out. So I was, keeping in touch and, trying to follow the season from afar in some ways, but then also doing some stories about, how this new staff was going about in recruiting when, they had such a horrible start to the season last year, and, getting to talk to some of the kids who committed, I really felt like that set me up well heading into this new position, because, I was able to talk to guys like Caleb and Curtis, who are coming in pretty early on last year, and then, heading into taking over the beat, just getting to talk to more of those guys, as they committed. I think one of them was talking to some folks from NBA Africa, in January, whenever they signed a core four to the roster. So yeah, I feel like that's all prepared me well. And the season, it is what it is. It was kind of a grind, those last few weeks. But yeah, now I feel like we're on to some really exciting stuff with, now that the roster is being rounded out.
Yeah, we were joking yesterday, for those who are listening, about how perfectly timed it was, that Louisville would finish out its roster right before we do our podcast. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Brooks, I think something that's interesting is, we've talked about this before, covering recruiting, because it has become, and it always has been, but it obviously in the last like 20 years or so, it's really become its own animal, its own beast. Having that background and that foundation, even if it was only for a short while, is really important to covering college basketball. From those experiences, from being around the recruiting world, from doing interviews and stuff like that, how do you think that maybe shapes the way you think about covering a college basketball team, or influences the way that you approach doing your work, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely just trying to, get to the players, as soon as possible and, source them and talk to them. It's been kind of my goal, like with each person who commits to try to do a story and, just to tell fans, here's who this person is, and we'll actually get to talk to them, rather than kind of just go like off the highlights. I feel like I've done that with most everybody in the classes coming in. There are just a few I haven't been able to contact, and then obviously these people who have, I committed and signed like a bit later on. Like especially like during our derby season, it was harder to get in contact with them because we've had so much going on. But just trying to focus on telling those stories, I think, especially, and like looking at like overarching trends as well, in like the recruiting world, and how can you take something that you maybe see, playing out, in like different instances, and try to write about it from like a bigger picture. So just being able to try to focus on, getting like the small details of a player's life, so fans feel like they like you have a better understanding of who they are as a person coming into this new situation, and then also trying to look at the big picture, like what are things, that other colleges are doing, and like what are things that U of L is trying to do, that we can write about for a big picture standpoint. And then also just, I mean, thinking about it, like, how does it like affect the way I cover a team? I mean, now that like the roster is rounded out, I was just, I thought about how quickly so many players left last year. I mean, after this past season, obviously very different circumstances, with a team that went 4-28 versus a team that, may have a bounce back season. But, I'm already, sitting here wondering, well, like, how do you go about getting enough guys, in the rotation and getting the minutes to making them feel like that they're like a part of this program, to where you don't have the same sort of turnover as last year. Mm-hmm. Because, it seems like everyone is super excited about, the people that they're bringing in. Now the question is, what happens over the next several months, and, how do these players feel about their fit here? Because as we saw this college basketball offseason, like people they're not shy about jumping in the transfer portal. So, I don't want to be jaded, and like, I really hate to have said that, like one day after we've, got the roster all set up. But I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about just because of how crazy this offseason was.
Yeah, and the transfer portal has drastically changed all of this, because you can rebuild or completely tear apart a roster overnight with the transfer portal, and the freedom of movement for players. And I think it's great. I mean, obviously, I think there's things that can be maybe tidied up from a rule standpoint that would make things make a little bit more sense, I guess, is the best way of phrasing it. But it is interesting. We're talking about recruiting, to go primarily from a time when the summer was such a pivotal part for a coaching staff, to go out and identify guys, and there's late arriving or late blooming prospects, or late arriving prospects on their radar, who end up picking up steam in the summertime, and by the fall you've got your visits and you're trying to round out that class. Now it's a little bit more When you talk to coaches about this, it's a little bit more precise in terms of precision oriented in terms of the high school kids. They really want to make sure that if they're getting a high school kid, that it's someone they think they can work with for multiple years, or obviously a one and done type talent. And there's a lot less of project taking, because I think they know that in the upcoming summer, by this time the season ends, you're going to have all of these experienced college players come back around for a second or third recruitment or fourth recruitment or fifth recruitment, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's completely changed everything about this sport and football too. Well, Brooks, before we switch gears, I do want to ask you one last personal question. So you mentioned you're from here, and I do think, as someone who moved here from somewhere else, grew up obsessed with college basketball and basketball in general, but was not from here. That was something that I really had to kind of be a sponge for and learn about, was the community here and the culture here around college basketball and the sport. How did your upbringing, I guess, what memories do you have that maybe shape your way of looking at Louisville basketball? And of course, I know people get caught up in it. Louisville and Kentucky, what that rivalry means, what it means in college basketball, and how that maybe shapes the way you think about. I keep saying shapes, but how that might influence your life as a college basketball writer.
No, I mean, it's definitely, there are some moments that stick out for sure. Just going to school, and having to deal with both sides, of the rivalry. It always seemed like, and there'd be years like the Edgar Sosa shot from like what felt like half court against Kentucky. I mean, that was a huge moment for everybody. You come into school the next, the next Monday, that's all everyone's talking about. Those games were huge. It felt like that there was just like a lot at stake each time. And, hopefully that's something that, we can get back to, because I feel as if if it's going to be like one of the best rivalries in the country, both teams ought to be, one of the, like two of the best programs in the country. And hopefully, as we keep building here, keep building back with this roster and maybe that's something that can happen. No, I mean, it's just like the passion that goes into it. I think like when I was given the opportunity, to step into this beat, like I know how passionate the fans are for this program because I've been around them my whole life. Like I have like my mom, she went to school at U of L. She would tell me stories about, she used to work at like the Red Barn in the 80s when they were winning those national championships under Denny's. So, hearing those stories, it's just like, man, I bet it was crazy to be in town during that time. So, I know that there are tons of people who have those memories, as we saw like last Monday night, people just wanted to show up for Denny, and, it's still very fresh, despite how long it's been. It just feels like that kickstarted just, how crazy people are about basketball here. And I mean, just last summer when I went out to the session of the EBYL event, and just seeing how many people were there during the summer on like a holiday weekend, to watch these kids. It was crazy. I mean, you had like, that game, DJ Wagner and Bronny James game. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in terms of just people, grabbing seats from like the other courts and bringing them over to this court. People were standing on chairs trying to get a glimpse of this game. And it's just like the middle of the summer, right? It's just, so like those moments, and just knowing how much people care and how much, they want to be successful, and how this team in some ways like doubles as a pro team, I've grown up around that, and those are just things that I like. I know that like I can't take this lightly because there's so many people out in the community that don't. And
No,
now you've gone completely villain mode.
Yeah,
You're about to make me.
There we go.
There we go. I was going to say you're about to like have some sort of a ransom message.
Yeah, really. My voice was about to be auto-tuned into a really creepy voice. Great moments in podcast making as the lights. I was too intently listening, I guess. That was
no, you're good. I mean, I think if I could think, just one thing is just like the passion of that people have for basketball here. Growing up, you see that, people are always talking about it. People go back and forth about it in school. You have like those like the moments, and like it's just everything about it. People care a lot, and it means a lot to people in the community. And then when you have a team, like Kentucky, that's a fierce rival, it only just amps it up because you
Mhm.
know, there are tons of Kentucky fans here in Louisville, and those people get to interact on a daily basis, and it's just like, you know, it's not fun when you're on either end of that. So you want to get better, and it's just a great environment. It's just a great environment to be covering college basketball specifically. And like what I love about it most, I mean, what I like, I got into wanting to be a sports writer because I like sports, but then like I would take some classes at Center that were more focused on just like writing and storytelling, and I found that I love storytelling. And so, my favorite part about basketball is that like there are fewer players out there all the time. You get to really focus in on telling some great stories about people and really feel like you get to know them as people and just like the things that they're going through during the season. So that's what I hope to accomplish with my coverage. I mean, I was really happy with how my story about L turned out right before the ACC tournament.
Mhm.
Given more time, and getting a full season under me, like that's what I really hope to do is just to just write the story of this season through the players and the coaches who are going through it.
Yeah. No, no, I applaud you for that, and that's so true, especially when they're not wearing helmets, they're not wearing hats, they're not wearing things that, if they were not wearing those things, you might not recognize them. They are very you see what a basketball player is all the time. You see their faces all the time, their body movements up close. It seems like with basketball, you can really observe people even closer than a lot of other sports. So it's a great sport to write about because of exactly those reasons, as you said, and I think you'll do a great job. I will tell you, Brooks, the first selection was a Monday after selection Sunday. You just walk around Louisville and you can feel the tension. Now this was 2014, so Kentucky and Louisville were both good. Kentucky was had been paired with Wichita State, I believe, in that crazy 1-8 game. And Louisville had thought that they got jobbed with a 4 seed, and they eventually played in the Sweet 16. I think my years are correct, right? Or did maybe I mixed those up? But Kentucky and Louisville played in the Sweet 16 that year, and the tension was incredible.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I got to go to the game in 2012 at the Final Four. I
oh
was
yeah, I
I
mean,
was
there
actually
you
there
go.
for that
Yeah,
game. It was crazy.
that's
Uh,
wild. Well,
I
Brooks,
didn't,
oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, 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 go ahead.
Oh no, it was just when I was in high school, a friend of mine's dad and his buddies, they would like go to Final Fours every year, and they got
Mhm.
an RV, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to go down to this? Do you want to ride in this RV with us? We're gonna get a spot like near the French Quarter and like stay at this RV park just like in New Orleans." So it was awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I always tell people who are not from here or don't are not around here that the Louisville Kentucky game, just imagine 22,000 butts absolutely clenched for 2 hours, and that is that is what the Louisville Kentucky game is. It's
Well,
my
and
podcast, so I
like
can say it.
yeah, and that's how it should be. Like I
Yeah.
feel like the past couple years it just hasn't been that. But hopefully, as both teams continue to get better, that's something we'll get back to because I think that's probably like the biggest sporting event in the state every year, like besides the Derby. So
Yeah.
it needs to live up to the billing.
Yeah. No question. Well, let's finish with this with switching gears to the team.
Sure.
We mentioned that yesterday, the commitment coming, so there's now another point guard in the mix. It is Tyler, right? I want to make sure that I don't that is it Tyler or Tyler Lawson.
Listening to highlights yesterday, I feel like they were just saying it time,
Okay,
and
perfect.
I
We'll take it. We'll take it.
that's definitely one of my first questions when he gets to campus and when I get to ask him some
Yeah, I mean,
questions.
you gotta
I gotta know
ask, right?
how did you come up with the name?
Or Johnson, excuse me, I misspoke. I'm thinking of Ty Lawson.
Yes.
Tyler Johnson. So you throw him in the mix. Just as a quick note for people who did not know much about him, he's from the Bronx. He had committed to Memphis. There's a couple other schools in the mix, NC State among them. But everyone had been talking, Brooks, about a need for another guard. I had Mike Rutherford on the show last time out. Same conversation. Look, that if you told Kenny Payne and his staff, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z after last season. To their credit, they have pretty much done it. They've gone out and nabbed all these 5-star kids. They've gone out and added some quality transfers. I mean, they have completely retooled the roster. And I think if your argument was this coaching staff just did not have the roster it needed to be able to play the way it wanted and compete the way it wanted, now you have the argument that they have added enough players and certainly retooled it in a way that they should be able to try to get closer to what they want. The fact is that it's 9 players. That's a lot of new additions to a team. But as we were talking about earlier, with the transfer portal being what it is, a lot of teams have makeovers overnight in the offseason. And who can blame Louisville for that? They went 4-28. So you add Tyler Johnson into the mix, and we'll just run down real quick. You got Dennis Evans, Caleb Glenn, Curtis Williams Jr., Trenton Flowers, which I think was maybe the most important addition of all of them from a recruiting clout standpoint.
Well, I mean, yeah, just getting him to come in early for sure.
Yeah,
is a whole different, just a huge boost. Whereas, if he's not, you're sitting here still thinking about, well, we have to wait another year before this guy comes in.
Right. And you hope
now
that your team improves enough that everybody sticks around and that he comes in 20. That's a long time to wait.
For sure.
For a commitment. And then from the college ranks, Sky Clark, Trey White, Danilo Jovanic. I have still not gotten my pronunciations right. And then Karan Davis. So it's a lengthy list, Brooks. I guess first and foremost, what do you feel like? How do you feel like Kenny Payne's experience at Kentucky can help him here? Because we talk about assimilating a group and the fast transition that you have just the summer to work with a group. They talked a lot last year about conditioning and trying to get the team in a very different place from a fitness standpoint, because Chris Mack's expectations and Kenny Payne's expectations for fitness level and the way they want to play are very different. You laid that foundation. I realize they don't have a ton of those guys coming back, but how much do you think maybe the Kentucky experience for Kenny Payne in particular, but also maybe Nolan Smith at Duke, will help in terms of being able to get a whole bunch of new guys, a whole bunch of young guys in this new group and getting rocking and rolling?
Yeah, I mean, something that I feel like Kenny talked about a bit, and just like what kind of players he wanted, harking back to like what players he had at Kentucky. He was, talking about guys that he would have to just like a pull out of the gym. Guys like, Devin Booker, people talking, constantly trying to get better. I feel like that these players just sort of fit more of that mold of guys who, I don't know. I mean, and it's really tough to kind of say, because it just seems like that they are just like a more committed. You have guys coming in, like Trenton Flowers, Caleb Glenn, Curtis Williams. These guys have been playing like at high level leagues in high school, and they don't lose often. Like I ran into Curtis at one of the games when he was on like an unofficial visit, and just asked how the season was going. And he's like, maybe they've lost one or twice on the season. So, these are guys who are coming in as winners. And I just think that, I don't know, it just feels different. And I think Kenny's experience at Kentucky, to your point, is probably a good thing. Bringing people together, having guys, like these freshmen who are coming in with expectations of playing a lot, and like what they're thinking about, to go to the pros, and Kenny can help them kind of, like chart their course. And with Dennis Evans specifically, like if Kenny, if there was ever a time for him to go back to what he was doing at UK when he had, Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns, I mean, that's certainly the case with Dennis, because I think what he needs to do is, find like his offensive game, and, who is he going to be as an offensive player in college? Because, obviously he can block shots all day. And I think just like listening to interviews with him from last summer, it just seems like that's kind of the next step of his game is just, building that offensive, the strategy with, how he wants to go about, each possession.
Yeah. Well, and I know when the season was starting and it was, preseason, they were talking a lot about, we don't know what we're going to be like as a shooting team, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities for offensive rebounds because this team has length and height and and all those things, and then it didn't pan out that way. Well, you just reloaded your roster with a whole bunch of lengthy guys, good wingspan, and guys who, like you mentioned, who have come from competitive programs, who are maybe have a little bit more edge in their pursuit of rebounds out of their area, stuff like that. When you talk about a Caleb Glenn who plays with a real tenacity, Williams is a good rebounder, was in the AAU circuit, Trenton Flowers. So yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a nice mix of guys who maybe are closer, like you said, to the style that Kenny Payne wants to play. And we know what the shot blockers have done over the years at Kentucky. What about returning guys? What about the returning guys? And I guess, is there someone in that mix who you think this is a really important offseason for, in terms of maybe finding their role or moving into more of like a leadership role? I mean, I immediately think of Mike James, but I'd be curious for your thoughts on the returning guys.
No, I mean, it's funny because there are only four, so I feel like I could say all four, because they have such a huge, like, I was thinking about it last night. I mean, the guys who are playing in the post, what Sydney did last year. I mean, I think he had just had a tough season, and I feel as if, the four guys who are coming back, at least like those three that play down low, I'm thinking of, a JJ and Manny, and then Brandon, like they have to have a different level of physicality down there, just helping set up the offense and grabbing rebounds, just because Sydney just, for whatever reason, didn't have it. And he wasn't that player that you saw at the end of, 2 seasons ago. That just never happened. So I feel like those guys have a huge role to play in terms of just, setting a different tone, because the team just, I don't feel like, was physical enough in the post. And, Sydney would just have, problems catching passes, trying to get the ball down to him. So, just taking that a step up will be great. I thought that JJ had a great end to the season at times. Like, there was that stretch of games with Clemson and Virginia where I really thought he turned it on. And, it'll be interesting to see what Brandon does coming back off of that injury. I mean, he got some time at the end of the season, but I feel like, that definitely hurt in terms of just not being able to play consistently and, just keep working. So I'm very interested to see that. But yeah, Mike, to your point, I think this is a big year for him. I thought, like all things considered, coming off of a huge injury like he did, he finished the season well. I thought he was one of the more consistent players on the team by the end of it. He's just big enough to get down low and just, he made a lot of just physical layups, and just having that someone who has the ability to get north-south, and he has the frame to make tough shots. It'll be big. And we talked about just getting players to gel together. I mean, you have four guys who went through the worst season in modern program history. You have, your three people from the transfer portal who, two of them had teams that made the NCAA tournament. One was, didn't play during a Final Four run on Miami. Trey White was out the first round. And then you have Sky Clark, who took some time away from basketball and only played 13 games as a freshman. So, like, those are like your most experienced players, or, is like that group of, I guess, 7 people coming in. So who I'm just curious as to, who among those guys will step up as a leader. And speaking to Sky over a couple months ago, he told me he started like a group chat with everyone who's coming back, and just, trying to, build some chemistry there. So, whether it's, he wants to take that role as a point guard and be the leader, or if it's someone from last year's team, and I think that those guys really have to come together and say, like, what happened last year isn't going to happen again. And, we have to take our game up another level, and we have to make sure everyone else is doing the same. So,
yeah. Well, and I do think the fresh faces will help. I had a really interesting conversation after the 22-23 season of 21-22 season with a coach who was on their way out, and there my lights go again. Great, Brooks. I really love this. This is my light sensor frustration.
Just makes it more dramatic.
There you go. Yeah. I've heard that this happens frequently in this room. But no, I thought it was really interesting talking to one of the outgoing assistants. And it was actually after Kenny Payne had been hired. And just having the conversation of, like, do familiar faces after how trying that season was, 21,
Yeah,
22, like does seeing familiar faces around trigger memories? Like if something bad happens, do you then look for that familiar face and think, here we go again? Does that conversation come up? And I know that this staff spends a lot of time on mentality. I know we've heard them talk about it ad nauseum over the last year. And I think it's going to be a really tough conversation to move past the struggles of last year. It certainly helps that they've rebuilt the roster in a very different way, but yeah, that's a tough conversation, and that's how do you, as a group that experienced that last year, how do you move past the and I'm not saying they had this necessarily, but the woe is me type feeling of, it seemed like every game there was a light switch that went, and no pun intended with our current situation in the lighting department, but it just felt like they'd be in a game for a little while and then something would happen and it was just like a 15-0 run and that was it, and you're like, okay, they're gonna lose by 30. So how do you get past those conversations and those almost like subconscious reactions to adversity of, here we go again, this is happening again? And like you mentioned, you get a couple guys in who have not experienced that at a high prep level. You bring in guys who have been to the NCAA tournament. And again, you've got a staff that really has not experienced that kind of stuff. That's just not where they've
right.
been as players and as coaches. So it'll be a real challenge for them, and it has not ever happened before where a team has struggled as much as Louisville did this past year, and then turned around and gone to the NCAA tournament. That's very, very difficult to do. But let's end on this question for you, Brooks. In an ideal world, I know Louisville fans are thinking like, look, you can retool the roster like we've been talking about. You can reshape a whole program overnight. They essentially have in about 2 months. Um, what do you feel like Kenny Payne's messaging needs to be to the public, to a fan base that I've noticed I've kind of disengaged from it because I really don't want any part of it, but there's a lot of infighting among Louisville fans, and a lot of it has to do with Kenny Payne and the job he's doing. But the recruiting, I feel like, has put fans back in closer to the camp of like, let's get excited about this team because that's what recruiting can do for you. So what does the messaging need to be in your view, for Kenny Payne to feel like they're building the right type of foundation and momentum of expectations and standards ahead of tipping off in November and trying to have a much better season this year?
Yeah, I mean, he's asked for patience like a ton last year. I I think you have to ask for just a little bit because you're getting so many new people in and you're bringing in like a whole other new group. But I think just like first and foremost being like, what happened last year, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen again. I just feel like that's, it would just be very tough to deal with that again. And trying to get just, distance yourself as far from that as possible.
Yeah.
Just like that's not me. That's not the way that my program is going to be run. Like we're going to turn this around. I don't know if, don't want to like go out there and say like, we're making the NCAA tournament because, if you as a coach are trying to set those expectations and then you don't meet them, people will be disappointed. I do think that like, I do think that that's a fair expectation to have. I mean, just some of the talent that's coming in, and if the coaching staff, like you mentioned, like they have success, um, you know, at each one has their own personal level of success for them to be able to reach a tournament. That's something that they've all done before, whether as players or coaches. So um, I also just think, this is a season to bring everyone back together too. I mean, we didn't like touch on it too much, but the whole messaging from some of the players who spoke at Denny Crum's celebration of life on last week. We're just talking about, we got to get behind Kenny, and we got to show him the support. Because I do think, and you look back at that Clemson game, the team truly played on a whole different level. and that was the biggest crowd at the Center all season. So if I was in the shoes of the coach heading into the season, I would try my best to be like, look, like we absolutely need you to come to the games, because it's clear that our kids will play at a different level if they can feel the energy coming from fans. And I would say we got, like a lot of exciting kids coming in, and you're going to want to come and watch them play. And just like try to distance yourself as much as possible from last season. Even though, like the people who are coming back, they had their moments and they showed you that, that they're capable of playing well above that record. I thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think, one thing I will give, I mean, I'll give him credit for a lot of things, but one thing that I'll give Kenny Payne credit for is he is a consistent messenger, and when he knows what he wants his message to be, he will stick to that message. Now, I may not always agree with it. I've certainly made several comments on this podcast during last season that would suggest otherwise. Quite frustrating at times, I think, but he is who he is. I mean, he came in with a very specific idea of what he wanted to do. And obviously things did not go the way I'm sure he had anticipated his first year, but he never really swerved off of that message. And that's a credit to him. If that's what he thinks will get him to where he wants to go, then by all means, stick to your guns and stick to it. So I'm interested to see what the messaging is. And it is, I agree with you. I think Louisville, in a vacuum, and we talked about this last week with Rutherford, is like, in a vacuum, Louisville men's basketball every single year should be in the NCAA tournament, period. Like, that's just the expectation. Yeah. You're off year, you're maybe in a play-in game, or you're like an 8, 9, 10 seed, something like that. But that's your bad year. Your good years, you're expecting to be pushing for top 4 seeds. And don't care what happened last year. I think that's something that, when you have the resources, the facilities, the backing that Louisville has, you can revamp your roster and maybe shred some of the historical stuff around teams that struggled as much as they did last year, and say, no, you should probably make the NCAA tournament. And if they don't, I think there's a scenario, and again, you can't do this without knowing all of the context behind it, but there's a scenario where they go like 18-13 and they have a much better season. They don't make the NCAA tournament, but I think people would be good with that by the end of the year. Depends on how it goes. But I think after this past season, I think a winning record would be welcome for a lot of people.
And just playing just like a cleaner brand of basketball, and just having, more of the heart. Like, I thought that there were some games late in the season when I was on the beat where, the team came out swinging and then would just kind of lose steam in the second half, or, senior night game. That was rough. It felt like just, there were very few players that showed up to that. So just giving people like a more exciting product and showing them that last season isn't any sort of like an indicator of how much the players care about turning this around. And, when you have so many new faces, I think that will be easy, because everyone I've spoken to has talked about, like, I want to be a part of, turning this around and getting it back to, getting the program back to, what it's supposed to be, just getting back to the culture of winning. So I do think that, the messaging to fans will be like, these guys are different, than some of the people you saw on the court last year. Just, everything that goes into how they prepare to the game and, what they want to get out of it.
And there's guards. Brooks, there's guards on the roster. There's multiple guards on the roster. It's incredible. Well, Brooks, thank you so much for joining us. We both got to hit meetings and get going with the rest of our days, but I really appreciate you taking a little bit of your time to tell us a little bit more about you. And I will tell you from experience, there is nothing better than coming in and into an off season, your first off season, and just kind of get a chance to catch your breath, think a little bit about what you want to do going forward, and get familiarized with a lot of stuff that it's hard to do during the season. So wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll have you on closer to the season and keep talking about Louisville basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, we're not going to be able to see a lot of this, but I think it's, like probably like one of the most exciting times of the season when these guys get back to campus and Kenny can just, put them out in the court and see how everything shakes out and see who has the chemistry and, who's going to show up and who may stand out, that's going to be surprising. So I think it is going to be, a really exciting time. And it's funny because like whenever the season ended in March, I was like, okay, off season time. But then, 8 players left the transfer portal. And so if maybe now it feels more like the actual off season now that the roster is rounded out, not have to be following some of that player stuff, to player movement and whatnot. But, it's going to be great. I'm really excited for my first full season.
Awesome. Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on. We'll chat soon.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. See you.